for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Diana. I'm really honored to be asked.
Well, before you joined as a board member of Endofound, you had your own very long haul with endometriosis. Would you like to tell us what that was like to not be diagnosed for 40 years?
Yes, I think, I was looking at the other interviews that you had, and I think some of what I would say is repetitive, but I think my story is unusual because of the length of time that I was misdiagnosed. Um, and I'd like to talk, I'd really like to help others knowing what I went through, because I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the best doctors in New York City, where I live, and none of them picked up on this in all of those years. And so I find that it's kind of scary, for what other people are going through in other cities or small towns, or
Mhm.
if I had this great medical expertise and this is what happened to me, I want the word out there. And
Yeah.
I think my big mission is, on the Endofound, is to educate doctors, gastroenterologists and OBGYN, um, gynecologists, for they just keep blaming each other,
Huh.
and they don't look, I'll get into that later, but my, so 40 years of being told I had irritable bowel syndrome, that I needed to go to a psychiatrist, that I needed to calm down. I was told it would go away when I got pregnant. It didn't. So it's just every doctor I went to sort of went by the diagnosis I had had when I was in my early 20s, and just kept going with it rather than taking a fresh look at maybe it's something else.
Mhm.
And so and my sister had, two endometriosis surgeries when she was in her 30s, but she had horrible periods. And she always sort of suggested that I might have it, but I thought, well, but I didn't have periods the way you did. I just have these stomach issues, which were, cramping and bloating and, constipation, and just like, sometimes very debilitating. And I went to the hospital twice with horrible pain, and they said it was nothing. Excuse me. Um, and so I never really thought she had anything that was good for me. But a few years ago, I read an article in the Times, and it was talking about Dr. Seshkin and the work that he did. So I said, I'm going to call their office, and I called up, and the first thing I said was, "Am I too old?" I was 63, and I said, "Am I too old?" And she said, "No, no, come in." And I felt like another doctor had laughed at me when I told him I was doing this, because I was 20 years after menopause. And so Dr. Seshkin met with me, and he asked me questions after all these years of being asked questions that nobody else had asked me before. And he said that, my pain was always on my right side. And he said, IBS pain is all over. So that's one thing, to look out for. And he believed, from examining me and from hearing my symptoms, that he thought that I had it, and he was going to take a chance and operate on me. So I had the surgery, and which was 3 years ago. And after the surgery, when I was at the hospital, the pain that I'd had all those years wasn't there anymore. And I felt just so much, so much better. And I still have issues. I don't think anything's ever perfect. But when it was over and I felt like a human being for the first time, I said, I want to give back to whoever ever cures me of this life, that I've had. I want to help them. And so that's why I'm involved now. And I think the world of Dr. Seshkin and the work he's doing and trying to do with, spreading the word to young women, and whatever other things we're going to be doing in the foundation. One thing he did tell me, which might be helpful, is when told him afterwards that when had my period, all those years, I had bowel issues every month. And I always thought it was just a period thing. And he said, no, that's endo. Um, and it was just this big buildup of bloating. And then the day I had my period, I would have bad diarrhea every single month. And he said that was a telltale sign right there. And it was just a relief to know that I wasn't crazy. And the emotional toll that it took on me all these years was really something else.
Yeah. And I don't think we talk about that enough, because for so long, like you said, a doctor laughed at you, someone you're trusting to help you, and instead they're laughing it off and thinking, we're going back to like to an archaic time where this was known as hysteria, and still people who are born with a uterus are being treated like, oh, you could possibly be crazy because I, as a doctor, don't quite get what's wrong with you. So instead of looking into it, I'm just going to dismiss you,
Yes.
let you live like that. And I think it is really important when we talk about advocating for ourselves to know what some of those symptoms are that are not common. Like you said, your sister had this, but her periods were bad and you were having bowel issues. And, very common, we've heard of that IBS is a misdiagnosis for what really is endo. So I do think like arming yourself with the knowledge of how endo can present itself and not what is considered the typical way of endometriosis is really,
Right.
really important.
Well, yeah, that's what as I mentioned to you the other day, is the gastroenterologist, who I've been seeing for over 20 years. I wrote to him after my surgery and I sent him my pathology report, and he was very defensive and said that my gynecologist should have picked up on this. And that's where I never talked to my gynecologist about my stomach aches. I just didn't go there for that. So he was passing the buck. It would have been easy for him to send me to Dr. Seshkin, who he knew, but he didn't. And you just get pegged. And I think everybody watching this should just, as we always talk in all these shows, is about being your own best advocate. And I never gave up in all those years. I tried everything. I always say, oh, this is going to be the cure. This is going to be the cure. And it wasn't the cure till I was 63. And it's a long time to live with in chronic pain. It really is. I feel bad for these girls who have 10, 20, 30 years, but I was like, hello, it's bad.
Right. And it does mess with your head. There's been studies that have said that living in that kind of chronic pain, it causes depression. It can make you question your self-worth. It takes away your quality of life. For you dealing with this, and I give you so much credit for continuing to fight for yourself and for not taking no for an answer, and for keeping your quest to find answers for yourself. And that's so important, because we hear these stories of people just saying, well, you know what, no one can help me. I don't have access to the right doctors. I don't know who the right doctor is anymore. So I'm just going to have to live like this.
Yeah.
How did you find the strength to keep going for finding answers?
It was hard. I mean, I went along with it for so many years, and I just figured this is how I was going to live. And it wasn't until this article that sort of said, oh, here's a whole new thing. Before it was more like, oh, you could do this homeopathic thing and that's going to help you, and for the IBS issues. I never thought that I didn't have IBS, because I didn't know what else it could be. I didn't know there was I didn't know there was endometriosis of the bowel. I never heard of it before. The other thing that was interesting is I had a child late on, which was my choice, but I had 2 miscarriages, and then I got pregnant easily, and then I had my son. But I had a very difficult pregnancy pain-wise, and I
Mhm.
think that's probably from the endo.
Right.
Uh,
And also, recurrent miscarriage can also be a sign of endometriosis.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All things that if you don't know, you're never going to put two and two together on that. Um,
I didn't.
right. And I think there's also this idea. I know when I was first diagnosed with endo, one of the signs for me was that I had a very, very low AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, and it, which is the egg reserve test, and it was like nothing. I wasn't sterile, I wasn't fertile, but it was nothing for someone who just was approaching their 33rd birthday. So those, those are common. I've also heard the stories about women that do get pregnant easily, but then they have trouble maintaining the pregnancy. For you, how did endo impact your interpersonal relationships? Uh,
Badly, badly. Um, I was married. I was with my husband for 30 years. I think I'm not saying it caused the demise, but it certainly didn't help anything. He was not very tolerant of my being sick all the time, and uh, my son, who I was worried about how it was affecting him of having a sick mother. And it's
mhm,
not like I was bedridden or anything, but I couldn't always go to everything. And mommy doesn't feel well today. And he's turned out great, and he's very understanding, especially having known what really was the problem.
right.
But I didn't. But it's no fun growing up raising a child, as you know, being the sick mom. You don't want that. You don't want somebody to think of you that way. And I think my husband felt. Um, I think he believed me, but it sort of became more about him in a lot of ways, about how it was affecting him rather than I was the one that was suffering.
Do you think because there was a lack of a diagnosis too, it was hard for him to empathize with your situation, with you being sick?
Yeah, I think, yeah, because IBS then was this sort of it's still this catch-all diagnosis, and um, there was nothing really to be done about it. So, I just, and some people don't like hearing about bowel issues and, things, things like that, you know.
Right.
Um, my last boyfriend was wonderful about it, and like, 'cause I had to miss a lot of things, a lot of parties and whatnot. He was terrific. My girlfriends, and what really happens in this, and I don't know if it's happened to you, but your world becomes very small.
Hmm.
And for me, it's become very small because I wanted a handful of girlfriends who really understood that if I canceled lunch or dinner, which I did often, that they didn't think I was making it up, that they
Hmm.
believed me. And so I didn't want to, like, a lot of other friends who I had to explain or feel bad about, or that they were like, oh, here she is doing it again.
Yeah.
So
There's a
yeah,
guilt. There's a guilt because
yeah,
people, and this I don't mean this to come across in any insensitive way, but when you have chronic illness, people have a really hard time wrapping their brain around the idea that it doesn't just go away, and that you can't predict when you're going to feel great and when you're going to feel not so great.
right,
And it's I've had that with friends and in past relationships where I try to be stoic. I try to push through. Try to always show up, for my responsibilities. But if it's a social event that I know it's going to wipe me out and I'm already at a 10 pain level and I don't have to mandatorily do it,
yeah,
you're sometimes you just have to do what's best for your body and you can't push anymore. But people don't really get endo and don't really get just how bad it is unless they've experienced it firsthand. They know someone who has it, they've seen it. It's just not an easy disease for people to conceptualize because it's invisible
yeah.
to so many.
Yeah, and I've heard of other people who have lost friends and people who won't make dinner dates with them anymore because they're sick of them canceling. And so I just, as I said, I have this handful of close people, and that's all I really need. You know, I don't need to. I don't need to explain myself. You
No,
know.
No, and I do think that there's always good that comes out of bad. And I think for me, one of the things that I've clung to with my journey is that quality counts, not quantity, not how many social events you check off the
Yeah,
calendar each year. It's really the quality. It's the quality of your life, which means how do you manage as pain free as possible? What do you do to make yourself happy? Um, and I do think a big thing that you touched upon is who's your circle, who can you depend on, who really gets you, and who's going to love you in spite of having something that few understand. And I, wouldn't wish this disease on the worst enemy.
right. And especially, not having parents, you rely on your friends
Yeah.
and your close, other relatives. But I think having a mother around probably is probably a nice thing. Going through this, I didn't have one
That's right.
for most of my life, and so I don't even know if she had endo. I don't know
Mhm.
who it came from.
Yeah.
Uh,
And they say it's hereditary, and obviously this is more of a doctor conversation, but
yeah,
I have been digging in my family too, and everyone's like, nope, didn't have it, nope, didn't have it, didn't have any signs of anything. And I'm like, okay. No. I'm like, so then why did I win the lotto?
it started a trend, right?
Right. Hopefully it's a short-lived one lifetime trend.
And you have a son, which is
Yes. And you know what's really sad, and I've said this before. I said this to my mom, who I've been very fortunate to have as a support system. But when I found out that he was going to be a boy, and I did IVF, when I found that out, I was one of the first things I thought of was relief. And I said, oh, I don't have to worry about him having endo, which is
yeah,
just it was, it's a mixed bag. It's like the fact
yeah,
that I'm even thinking that is crazy.
it's crazy, yeah.
But we get why. And speaking of that, for someone who has gone through so much, and has really just been such an advocate for so many, what advice do you have for someone who might be where you were only 3 years ago, and you knocking on doors and feeling just misheard and not understood?
Well, not everybody can get to Dr. Seshkin, unfortunately. I wish we could clone him and put him all over the country, but he he's the only one that really asks me the right questions. And I think if you go on the website, I think it will answer questions that you have
Mhm.
to make you ask your doctor those questions.
And I'm glad that you brought that up too, because we are going to be launching on EndoTv an Ask the Doctor series. So those questions that come into Endofound, those questions will get filtered. I will read them. We will ask our team of doctors, from all over the country on the specific questions that you're asking. We will get you those answers, because we
Oh,
do
that's
realize,
great.
yeah, because we do realize that not, I did an interview once with a reporter from West Virginia, and she was lovely, but she said, we don't have doctors like excision surgeons here. We have one doctor in our town. He's a family doctor. We don't even have a gynecologist until you get to the nearest city in Virginia. So
Yeah.
very aware of how fortunate we are to be in the metropolitan area, and close to a major city. So if you have questions, please keep sending them to the website, because we will get to them. I don't know how many, but I'm going to do our best to get
Right.
to at least the scope of the topic, so we can get everyone what they need for information, so that
Yeah,
they can get the help.
that would be great. One thing I just wanted, if we have time, I just wanted to
Yeah.
talk about is the emotional mental thing, which we talked about a little bit. But uh, everyone thinks that when you go through your surgery and you're feeling well, that everything will be fine, and it's not fine, because you've lived with something for so many years that it's part of you, the how you think of yourself, and dealing with how your life has been. And I have found that a very big struggle for myself. And maybe it's because I've lived with it so much longer,
Hmm.
of being that person. But I'm still I still have fears that it's not going to come back for me because I'm older, but for other girls, it will, or might come back.
Yeah.
And so you're living with that kind of what if, and my life might seem normal now, but maybe it won't be normal a year from now.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to deal with.
It
I
is.
don't know if you've had that experience, but
Oh yeah, I worry about it all the time.
you
I,
do. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm wishing for menopause, which is just not a normal thing to want. But and
But
I know,
it didn't work for me.
and I also know that it doesn't always work, but I mean, I keep saying in our endo community circles, I've got this. I'm all about awareness. Awareness is the first step to everything. But now I'm just like, we need action. We need action. We need research. We need legislation. We need to really be getting better treatment options, because the idea of repeated surgeries and then surgeries can cause scar tissue, and scar tissue can cause pain, and
Right.
there's just no real, there's just not, I mean, thank God for the excision surgery, because that's the best thing we have. And it's wonderful for so many people, but the coming back, the recurrence rate, and I know that there's a lot of theories out there, but I do know of people who have had recurrent endo, and it's a scary way to live,
Yeah.
to just be on a hope and a prayer that you're not going to be in pain again, and you're not going to need another surgery again.
One thing I would say is, having been diagnosed 20 years after menopause, that if women are still suffering from IBS at any age, that they go check it out.
Yeah.
Because there's no real reason why I had viable lesions after all this time. I don't think Dr. Seshkin even really understands. I mean, your body still produces estrogen after you stop having your period, but all these women that are of a certain age think, oh, it has to just be IBS, and maybe it's not. And I'm the poster child for that, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wouldn't give up because you're, 50 or 60.
Right. And if it wasn't excised, it doesn't mean that it didn't go away. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. I think if the symptoms seem like it could be, then treat it as if it is and go find that doctor.
Yeah. And don't let them laugh at you.
No. 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 No, and it's hard in those situations, but I would say you know yourself better than anybody else, even someone with a bunch of fancy degrees on the wall. You know your body better. You've lived in it
It's true.
your entire life.
It's very true. I thank you for everything. I think this is a wonderful idea to have this venue, and I hope it grows.
Thank you.
And you're doing wonderful things for the foundation also.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story and helping the way you help, and
Sure.
getting the foundation to make some big moves.
Let's hope.
Let's
Let's
hope.
hope.
All right. I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Diana. Bye.